Story 1. Déjà vu is that peculiar fleeting sensation that you've previously lived through an instant. Everyone has encountered it. Most individuals disregard it as a cerebral malfunction or a happenstance, but occasionally it seems incorrect, like existence is duplicating itself in ways it ought not. These are 4 purportedly factual accounts of déjà vu that didn't dissipate, but instead twisted into something chilling. I typically avoid discussing this due to its absurdity, but an incident occurred to me during 2017 that prompted doubt not solely in my mental state, but the framework of actuality itself. I resided in a rather shabby apartment block in central New Jersey, a 3-level brick structure, likely unrenovated since the late 80s. The sort of location where passage illumination buzzed softly in each entrance, featured flaked coating and irregular. I occupied it with my flatmate Nick, employed in nocturnal security for a depot just beyond town. Most evenings, I possessed the space alone. It was a Thursday evening in early February when I returned home slightly tardier than normal. I recall ascending the steps and being struck by an aroma I hadn't encountered in ages. Scorched tire, blended with a citrus detergent. That scent ignited something within me. This odd, abrupt recollection that seemed to belong to another. As I proceeded down the passage, the déjà vu sensation struck me intensely. Not merely a burst of recognition, but an overpowering impression I had previously existed this precise moment in meticulous, minute detail. I halted roughly 5 feet from my doorway, and immobilized. I understood what followed. The fixture overhead would flutter twice. A female resident beneath would shout something indistinct, then chuckle. Subsequently, at the corridor's distant terminus, something weighty would tumble. A muted metallic clang, and it transpired in that precise sequence, exactly as anticipated. I recollect standing there, not yet frightened, merely bewildered. I considered perhaps I had envisioned it, but then it recurred the subsequent night. This instance I was viewing television, consuming leftover Chinese cuisine, and abruptly I knew the scene about to display before it occurred. The speech exchanges, the ambient sound, even the timing of a device vibration from my bedside table. Over the subsequent 5 days, these occurrences amplified. I commenced documenting them, experimenting, and each instance I was accurate. I knew things I shouldn't have, like the exact moment Nick would message me or the instant a neighbor's canine would commence yelping, but they weren't recollections. They were cues of something I hadn't yet lived. That's when the vision commenced. I envisioned reclining in bed and the entrance parting. Nick entered, pallid and exuding perspiration, uttering, "There's an individual inside the structure." His vocalization sounded incorrect, excessively monotone, like playback. I inquired who, and he merely gazed at me. That vision replayed nightly, but the concluding evening, it wasn't a vision. At 3:12 a.m., my entrance parted, and Nick stood there uttering those identical phrases. I trailed him into the passage, gripping a club. He gestured toward the staircase. Nobody was present, yet something felt amiss. The shades didn't shift appropriately. We contacted authorities. Nothing. I informed Nick regarding the visions, and he merely stared, stating, "I've been experiencing them." Also, neither voiced more. The déjà vu concluded that night. Yet since then, I sporadically perceive a flicker of something, a remembrance, impression, a clamor, and I'd ponder if I'm about to recall something preceding its recurrence. Because if that entrance part's in new, and I perceive those phrases, I'm uncertain I'll pursue. I've commenced questioning if what we deem memory is genuinely our intellect interfacing with chronologies layered atop one another, like ancient wallpaper tiers, each subtly permeating the subsequent. Occasionally I believe the passage itself is a fragile juncture, a boundary between dual realities. I vacated half a year afterward. I've passed that structure repeatedly. Each instance, I pledge, I sense a pull, urging halt and entry. A segment still trusts, something lingers at that corridor's conclusion. Not an entity or phantom, merely a selection I haven't enacted in this existence variant. And each contemplation, I sense proximity to enacting it. Story 1. Déjà vu is that peculiar fleeting sensation that you've previously lived through an instant. Everyone has encountered it. Most individuals disregard it as a cerebral malfunction or a happenstance, but occasionally it seems incorrect, like existence is duplicating itself in ways it ought not. These are 4 purportedly factual accounts of déjà vu that didn't dissipate, but instead twisted into something chilling. I typically avoid discussing this due to its absurdity, but an incident occurred to me during 2017 that prompted doubt not solely in my mental state, but the framework of actuality itself. I resided in a rather shabby apartment block in central New Jersey. A 3-level brick structure, likely unrenovated since the late 80s. The sort of location where passage illumination buzzed softly in each entrance, featured flaked coating and irregular. I occupied it with my flatmate Nick, employed in nocturnal security for a depot just beyond town. Most evenings, I possessed the space alone. Story 2. I'm Ryan. This transpired 3 years prior during my 17th year, my sibling Chris being 19. We inhabit a minor settlement encircled by woodland. Scant activity occurs here, so youths like us become readily uninterested. A pathway adjacent to our dwelling penetrates the wilderness. It extends miles. Individuals mention aged edifices and peculiar objects concealed profoundly, and we consistently discussed investigating, but deferred until one October weekend. We lacked engagements, and Chris suggested we finally inspect the dwelling he overheard about from schoolmates. It was a crisp, overcast day. The foliage was altering hues, rendering it a pleasant picturesque stroll. We actually stowed hydration and beams, informed our mother we were trekking, and departed approximately 3 p.m. Daylight fades early in October, so we calculated perhaps 2 hours total. The hike commenced ordinarily. It's not that I hadn't traversed these woods previously, but after perhaps 10 minutes, I initiated feeling peculiar. It seemed I had traversed this precise trail previously, like I recalled this exact hike in dialogue with my sibling. Even upon discovering a fractured barrier post, I sensed remembrance of that exact instant. Yet I had never descended this route, I was assured. Chris preceded me discussing something random, but I barely registered. I persistently scanned my surroundings, and everything appeared excessively recognizable. I anticipated a dense tree possessing a substantial cavity near the trailside. 5 minutes afterward, we passed it. I voiced nothing, as I've undergone dozens. This instance simply felt abnormally heightened. Deeper penetration yielded amplified recollections. I initiated recalling a dwelling, a 2-tiered house featuring green coating, shedding, and a fractured front stair. I envisioned it distinctly. I recollected a fractured pane on the upper level, and deceased vegetation ascending the side. Yet, I had never witnessed this dwelling in actuality. I still withheld informing my sibling. We ultimately attained the dwelling between 3:30 and 4 o'clock p.m. Witnessing it, my core plummeted. It matched the house envisioned, down to virtually every detail. I merely observed while Chris advanced toward the veranda. I desired retreat. In that instant, I genuinely pondered if I had witnessed this house previously, despite near certainty I hadn't. I queried Chris if it appeared recognizable, and he expressed confusion, declining. Then he inquired my implication. I confessed an uncanny déjà vu of this exact instant. I didn't wish to retreat, however, so we proceeded. The front entrance was ajar, signifying we weren't the inaugural explorers. Chris nudged it gradually, producing prolonged squeaking. Inside, it emitted the anticipated odor of prolonged desertion, and the stillness was nearly ear-splitting. We advanced internally, encountering damaged furnishings, aged wall covering detaching, and a staircase ascending left. We lingered momentarily. Subsequently, we perceived a noise, a gentle groan, like footfall. Chris observed me. I reciprocated. We muted briefly. He challenged me to ascend and investigate. I refused adamantly and counseled evacuation. He somehow persuaded rock, paper, scissors to determine the investigator. I failed, yet still declined. Chris preferred ascending above immediate departure. As he ascended, each riser groaned. I trailed but remained somewhat adjacent, while he approached the chamber seemingly emitting noise. It was the terminal chamber rightward. The entrance was marginally ajar. He extended and nudged it wider. I couldn't perceive interior contents from my position, but Chris witnessed something internally. He petrified and abruptly shrieked, nearly propelling me downstairs. He yelled, "Flee!" and we plummeted downstairs and outward. We sustained sprinting, not halting trailside. We continued until breathless. Upon cessation, we stooped, respirating. My core pulsated excessively. "What did you witness?" I interrogated. Chris observed me, stating, "There existed a female inside, observing the fenestration statue-like." Upon querying appearance, he stated he primarily noticed her shoulder-length, gray-blonde hair. He persistently questioned my foreknowledge of a female above. I accused fabrication to counterprank, presuming he interpreted my fright attempt, thus reciprocated. But he never relented. He never confessed. He affirmed 4 days, weeks, months, even presently years later, that he witnessed that female internally. Partially, I recognized potential retaliation for perceived prank, but profoundly, we both perceived that overhead noise. It originated from something animate. My déjà vu or presentiments were also excessively explicit for chance. I'm grateful I wasn't the solitary room examiner. This occurrence altered my déjà vu definition. Story 3. During 2020, amidst peculiar transitional periods of restrictions and reopened commerce, I experienced a duration feeling less like actuality and more like traversing an inescapable scripted cycle. I was operating home tardily from my companion's residence. Perhaps 1:30 a.m. It had freshly snowed, lightly, yet sufficiently rendering the pavement slippery. I inhabit a minor settlement beyond Scranton, Pennsylvania, featuring one notorious junction adjacent to my location for collisions. It possesses for halting indicators, but zero signals, and on snowy evenings, you essentially speculate regarding others' compliance. Approaching the junction, I sensed something weighty within my torso. Initially not dread, merely an odd displacement sensation, like re-entering a previously inhabited instant. I decelerated, despite possessing Subsequently, without caution, a black cargo vehicle violated the halting indicator level. Had I not braked prematurely, it would have impacted my flank directly. I steered aside, trembling, observing the rear illumination vanish into snowfall. That would have terminated me. I understood. But what alarmed me more was my foreknowledge. Not danger, anticipation. I recollected it. I recollected specifics like crunching alloy, fractured pane, and the cushion impacting my vision. None materialized, yet I recollected it factually. I attributed it to strain, the pandemic, the seclusion. But subsequently, several evenings later, I underwent another episode. I was at a crimson signal and recollected the melody about to broadcast prior to occurrence. I recollected the female traversing the avenue with her canine before visibility. I initiated feeling non-present, merely Then the visions commenced. Identical roadway, identical collision. Each night, in one vision, I exited the automobile and witnessed my own form collapse driver's side. Gaze vacant, a lengthy laceration traversing my forehead. I could perceive my respirations. On the fifth night, I awakened perspiring and vowed to bypass that route. I drove 10 minutes circuitously via the expressway. Later that day, an associate notified me. A lethal collision transpired at that identical junction. Identical timing I typically traversed. Identical automobile model and hue. An alternate individual, but identical conclusion. Henceforth I've contemplated, was I recollecting my own demise in an alternate chronology? Was a segment of me redirected ultimately? Or was I merely a variant experiencing fortune while another didn't? I haven't undergone comparable déjà vu since, but occasionally nocturnal driving with excessive route familiarity induces chills, because perhaps a segment recalls something prohibited. I subsequently researched near-demise incidents, discovering individuals reporting identical recollections of known occurrences, exclusively involving proximate demise brushes. Perhaps déjà vu is merely a consequence of traversing fissures. Perhaps duration isn't linear, but a perpetually reloading cycle, and sporadically an internal element recollects preset events. If factual, then each disaster evasion might not result from fortune. It might occur because we've previously endured it, and a segment strives frantically to prevent recurrence. Story 4. Preceding my information technology profession, I dedicated 2 years performing nocturnal duties at a prolonged care establishment in upstate New York. It was an aged institution, slightly dilapidated, yet adequate. We possessed several inhabitants with cognitive decline, but most were steady, merely aged, requiring aid. One female named Miss Adelaide existed. She was 87, predominantly coherent, exceedingly gentle, and reserved. She possessed a faded depiction of a juvenile male on her bedside table, termed her descendant, yet nobody ever visited. Initially, I established a regimen: midnight inspections, occupant verifications hourly. Most nights were uneventful, yet periodically I'd discover Miss Adelaide conscious, ceiling gazing, murmuring a sluggish, sinister melody. One night, approximately 2:15 a.m., I discovered her upright, vision widened. Upon inquiring necessities, she articulated unblinking, "You previously inquired. You inquire nightly, but tonight is distinct." I sensed an odd internal sensation, like she recited my forthcoming script. I chuckled, tensely proposing hydration. She declined, adding, "You should recall this segment." I notified my overseer, dismissing it as bewilderment or somnolent articulation. but the subsequent night, she replicated the rejoinder verbatim. On the third night, she was deceased, perished asleep approximately 1:50 a.m. Upon entering her chamber for inspections, the berth was newly arranged and her possessions crated. I couldn't cease contemplating her statement. I investigated age documentation and archived annotations. It materialized another nocturnal employee documented comparable content in her documentation years prior, consistently nocturnally approximately 2:00 a.m. She reiterated expressions, predicted exact deeds, even once uttered a new nurse's designation. One notation from 2013 featured her stating, "I recall this variant. You reassess at 3:07. You perpetually do." And per the annotation, the nurse inspected their chronometer. It displayed 3:07 precisely. I comprehend not Miss Adelaide's situation. I don't genuinely trust the supernatural, yet it appeared she inhabited a recurrence or malfunction. I cannot clarify, yet perhaps she was immobilized, observing her existence replay repetitively, anticipating divergent conclusion. Presently, I labor desk-bound, yet sporadically undergo déjà vu waves. And upon occurrence, I pause and attend, because perhaps it's not merely an intellectual deception. Perhaps it's communication. Perhaps it is Miss Adelaide or her equivalent interfacing across chronologies, striving to remind us, we've previously existed here. And it concluded, I've since encountered individuals laboring at that identical institution, years separated. Without my prompting, they mentioned peculiar nocturnal visions there. One even stated an occupant cautioned imminent termination preceding release a week afterward via downsizing. She forgot the occupant's designation. I merely assented, remarking intrigue. I contemplate Miss Adelaide frequently and occasionally descending into slumber. I perceive that identical sinister murmuring within visions. I cannot resist persistent contemplation regarding Miss Adelaide.